We're on Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. We gave up before the finish line yesterday. We didn't make it to the end of the parak. So we're about 2/3 of the way down. Ki Asur of Dimi Am Rabbi Yechanan. I'd say it's like 10 lines up from the bottom of the narrow lines. Ki Asur of Dimi Am Rabbi Yechanan. Hatoikav es Chaveri B'din. If someone is giving someone else, his friend or his colleague, a hard time in a din Torah, he's hassling him. One of them says, let's stay here in the city and use the local bez. And the other one says, no, I want to go to the big bez. And the one who's the target of the problem, the one who's not the troublemaker, Rashi says, he wants to go to the big bezdin because this other guy who's very rambunctious will be calmed down if he's in the big city by the big bezdin. He'll behave himself. So Rashi says, we forced the troublemaker to go to the big bezdin. Amalafan Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Mishnah. Amalafan Rebbe Elazar. Rebbe Elazar said, Rebbe, he said to Rebbe Yochanan, Misha noise b'chaver mana yotzi mana al mana. He says, what are you saying? He's saying, let's say the person who is giving a hard time, the tough guy, is the lender, and he's now trying to get his money back, and he's suing. He's putting the debt collectors on him. He's harassing him, and this guy says, "Okay, I want to go to Washington D.C. to the Supreme Court to get them to look at our case, because then you're going to behave yourself." So he says the person who lent money now has to also spend he's owed him money, a 100 zuz. He also is going to have to spend 100 zuz to travel to this court. It doesn't seem fair that in addition to waiting to get his money back, he has to now spend money on traveling to get his money. So he says, no, therefore, it's not like this. You make him, they could stay in the town where they are. You can't force him because the other person feels threatened by the aggressive tactics to go to the big city bezdin. Itmanami Rav Safra, Shnaim shenisnatzmu b'din. Two people who are arguing in a din Torah. And again, they're disagreeing. Should they stay where they are now, or should they go to the larger city, the bezdin there? You force the one who wants to go to the big bezdin, to the big city for the bezdin, and you say you have to stay here in your local town, go to the local bezdin. And so the reason why he's saying he wants to go to the major city is because they have a more prestigious bezdin. The Gemara says, and if they start the case and the local bezdin has a question that they don't know the answer to, if they have something that they need to ask, they write a letter and they send it to the other bezdin and ask their question. It's a very interesting concept, right? In the middle of Din Torah, they say, we don't know what the halacha is. We'll send a letter and ask the other bezdin what the psak is. Vim Amar Kisvu Tnuli Ezatam Dantuni, if the person who had wanted to go to the Beis Havad and was forced to stay here, if he says, listen, I want you to write an opinion after the case is done, saying what your reasoning was. By stois, when a bezdin makes a psak, it sounds in this Gemara, they don't have to explain why they did it. They just have to say who they paskin like. But if he says, I want to have a record of what your reasoning was, they have to write and give it to him, and then he could go show it to someone else and find out if they made a mistake. As we've seen a number of times, there was definitely a concept of bezdin making a mistake and being responsible if they're found to be wrong. The bezdin themselves have to pay for the person who was wronged. So there is it's not like a final decision that can never be impugned. It's not like our current concept of das Torah. It was a psak halacha. You could sort of like appeal it to a higher court. If you went to another bezdin who was acknowledged to be greater, and they said your reasoning was wrong, they could reverse the din. when you have a woman who's neifel yibam, her husband died, and now she has no children, she's neifel to his brotherly yibam, she has to go to his town to get a chalitza. Ad kama, where does she have to go to? Rav Ami, afilu mitferya l'tzipari. Rav Ami says even to go from Tveria to Tzipari, meaning she has to go to his town. Rashi says even Tveria, which is has a greater bezdin than Tzipari, she still is required to go to his town to get the chalitza. He's the one who's being mater her, so she has to go there to get the heter. Avram Kahana, Mikra, where do we see this from? The Karoloi Ziknei Iroi. The Zakanim of his city will call to him and say, they'll call him Beis Chalutz. So the chalitza is called Ziknei Ira, the Zakanim of his city. V'loi Ziknei Ira, not the Zakanim of her city. Amar HaMeimer, Hilchos HaKayfen Oisai, V'yelech L'makam Havad. He says the halacha is that we do force one of the parties in the Dintayra to go to the city with the greater bezdin. I always said the other way around, that we force the person who wants to go to the Beis Habad that he has to stay in the city. So Gemara, no. When the loiva says to the malva, I want to go to the Beis Habad, then it's too bad. We say, no, you got to stay in the current town, in our hometown. Avol malva. But if the malva says he wants to go, Eved loiva lish malva. The malva, the lender, is the one who dictates the terms. Since he's the one who lent the money, and he's the one who put out. He has the upper hand, and he gets to say where the dintar should take place. Now, normally you would say that the case of where you have a malva and a loiva, the loiva is normally saying, I'm not a loiva. So maybe why should we say the loiva is meshubah to the malva? He's saying I didn't borrow money from him. But if you think about it, the typical case is not where someone is kaifer. If someone denies, he says I don't owe any money. So the malva knows he hasn't got much of a case. It has to be a case where he has some proof, or he was moida b'mixus. Because the moida b'mixus, that's how you know he's a loiva. The Gemara gives an example. They sent to Mar Ukva. They sent from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. Mar Ukva was the Gadol Hadar in Bavel. And they addressed him like this: L'dziv le kabar Basya. To the person whose face shines like Bar Basya, like the son of Basya, meaning Moshe Rabbeinu, who was cared for by Basya. Basya was Paro's daughter, who took him out of the Nilus, out of the water. So they addressed Mar Ukva as the person whose face shines. Moshe Rabbeinu, it says his face was shining. So they said, your face shines like Moshe Rabbeinu, Shalom. We're sending you Shalom. And they said this, if we have the following issue. Ukvan Habavli, who lives here in Eretz Yisrael, Kibel Kadmana, he came to us with a dintayri. Yirmiyah Achi, his brother Yirmiyah, who was in Bavel, Hever Olayas Haderach. He did something to Ukvan. Rashi says two pshatim. He says either he abused him, or that he owes him money. So not he abused him. He was masarasim. I don't know where that comes from. Like how ikval avas haderech. I guess la'akav. Sometimes we say it means to turn off. Maybe that's what it means. The Imrulai, and they said, so the Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael, good morning, said to the Chachamim in Bavel, Bidan, we want you to judge this Yirmiyah and get him to paskin on him. And they also said, Hisiyu v'yira penenu b'Tveria, and send him to us so we could be done him in Tveria. First you said, you be done him, you judge him, saying you should judge him. It's you over here, and he's saying you should send him to us in Tveria. You're saying you should send it to us that we should done him. So they said to them, the Talmid, the Chachamim in the Eretz Yisrael said to the Chachamim Bavel, You should judge him. Itzai is sayis, and if he agrees, fine. Be loy, but if he's not masking to your being down on him, it's you. In that case, send it to us in Tveria. Ravashi, I'm a dine knossos. Rashi says no, it's a different issue. It was a dine knossos, and therefore they couldn't really be done in Bavel. They said you should don him, even though it wasn't really possible because he was in Bavel. But they said you could don him, but they didn't really mean it because it was a dine knossos. They really meant send him over to us so we can make a din Torah. Hadran Allah zeb bayra. Hadra Chalam. That was a tough parak. It wasn't. We weren't expecting Sanhedrin to have such a intricate parak. Was the one with the Chadashim and the Yamim? Yeah. Zak the Mishnah. Echad dine mamanis ve'echad dine nefashos b'drisha b'chakira. Both dine mamanis and dine nefashos, you have to do interrogations of the Eidim. So Drisha and Chakiris are made up of two things. One of them is that you ask all the basic information about the case. You ask when did it happen, and who are the parties, and what did you see? And those things are done, so you have to set a baseline. You have to say, what did you see? And then if they say what day it happened, if someone will say, no, you were someplace else on that day, you can prove them to be zaynimi, you can prove them to be false. So those are the basic facts that you have to know. And chakiris are the extra investigations that you do to find out, what color was the thing he was wearing, or what color was the knife, would be an example, right? What kind of knife it was that he stabbed him with. Those kind of questions are to trip up the Eidim and find out if they're consistent. So the Mishnah says you do both. Now, we had seen before that Drush and Chakiris are only by din and nefashos, not by din and mamanis. The Gemara is going to ask that question soon. But in any case, we say Shenamar Mishpat Echad Yelachem, because the Torah says Mishpat Echad Yelachem. That tells you that there should be one rule of dinim, and that from that heck we're makesh din and mamanis to din and nefashos. So just like din and nefashos, the Drush and Chakiri, you need the same thing by din and mamanis. Zak the Mara Ma bein now Zak the Mishnah Ma bein din and mamanis to din and nefashos. What's the difference between dinei mamanis and dinei nefashos? Even though we just said there's a hekesh, it's not for everything. In many, many things, there's differences between the way a din Torah is conducted for dinei mamanis, for monetary disputes, and dinei nefashos and capital disputes. Dinei mamanis b'shloisha, v'dinei nefashos b'asem b'shloisha. Like we learned in the first parak, dinei mamanis you only need 3 dayanim, dinei nefashos you need 23 dayanim. Dinei mamanis peischem bein l'schus bein l'chayva. Dine Mamanis, you start, and the Gemara is going to say exactly what that means that you start. What is it? But you start the Din Torah with a proclamation. It could be either l'schus, it could be l'chayva. The Dine Nefashos paisin l'schus ve'en paisin l'chayva. By Dine Nefashos, you specifically have to make this opening statement. Has to be advocating for letting the accused off and not saying that he's chayiv. Dine mamanis matan al pi echad, bein l'schus bein l'chayva. If you have a din of a mamanis, you can just say one person is chayiv and the other person is pater, even if there's just one more than the other, which seems pretty obvious, right? Because if you had to have two more than if you had two to be chayiv someone, by every dine mamanis is both one person is chayiv and one person's pater. And you only have 3 people in the bezdin. So you had to have a margin of 2 saying that you're chayiv or pater, because one person is always chayiv and one person is pater. You'd always have to have a unanimous din. And we know that we don't need any unanimous din. This is just my observation. But in nefashos, matan al pi echad l'schus. But in nefashos, you can only decide you can let someone off if you have a margin of 1. If there's one more dayan saying he's innocent against the ones who are saying he's guilty, but you have to have a margin of 2 to convict him. So that's the difference between dinei mamanis and dinei nefashos. Dinei mamanis machzirin bein l'schus bein l'chayva. If you conclude a din and then new evidence comes out, like we said before, if an aid comes from Medina Sayyam, you can go relitigate whether you're causing someone to be chayiv and someone pater. I think this is just bein l'schus bein l'chayva is just to keep it consistent. Because like we said, Dinei Mamres, there isn't like a schus and a chayva. When you mezaka one person, you're being chav to the other. So every case is always schus and chayva. Dinei nefashos machzirin l'schus ve'em machzirin l'chayva. And dinei nefashos, if new evidence comes to say someone is innocent, you can go reopen the case, but you don't do that to make him chayiv. Dinei mamres hakol melamdin schus v'chayva. We've mentioned before in the Gemara that by dinei mamres, if they used to have the students, like they have this now also, interns all sitting around during the Din Torah. So if they had something to contribute on the dinei mamres, they could jump in and say what they think. They can make a suggestion. The court clerk can pipe up. We don't allow these Talmidim to say that they have a reason why he should be chayiv. They're about to let the guy off. He says, "Oh no, you forgot this drisha. You forgot this shach that says that he's really chayiv." Dinei mominus hamalamed chayva malamed schus malamed schus malamed chayva. By dinei mominus, if someone had originally said, this person, there's a reason he should be chayiv, he could then later on say, but there's a different reason he should go free. And vice versa. If he first said, I think he should go free, he could then change his mind and say he should be chayiv. Dinei nefashos hamalamed chayva malamed schus. By dinei nefashos, someone who originally said he should be chayiv, he can switch gears and say he goes free. Aval malamed schus, someone who said he should go free, he can't change his mind and say, there's a reason he should be chayiv. So Rashi has an interesting explanation of this. You would have thought just, like everything else, we're trying to find schusim. But he says more specifically, Ein chayza malamed chayiv in Rashi, Svari, the binim v'hitzila, like we are saying that you have to try to acquit the person who's chayiv in dinei mamres. So Gemara mukum lo b'shmas mat man hudol yachza. You can't do it b'toich masu maten. The mitoich she'ata oimeloi shaloi lachzer. Since you tell him that he can't change his mind, he said he's potter. He wanted to say he's potter, and he said you're going to be stuck with that. You can't now say that he's chayiv. Hu machzar acharayis lahamed dvarav. He's going to, since he's stuck with his original thing that he said he's potter. So the natural inclination of a person is once he's stuck in that position, he's going to try to justify it. So he's going to be working very hard to find reasons why this person should be potter. And maybe because he'll be so incentivized not to look like an idiot, because he was the one who said he's potter, he'll come up with a good svara. So the Rashi ends off. After they've already made all the arguments and they've had all the deliberations. Rashi says, I guess it comes from the Gemara, that at the end of the day, he's not stuck that he can't say anything. It means after everything, everyone has said everything, and he says, but he really is chayiv because you didn't think of this argument. He can at that point say it all the way at the end. You just can't be part of the deliberations. Dinei mamnes. So the second to last narrow line. Dinei mamnes danen b'yayim v'goyim b'layla. Dinei mamnes, you could start it entire by day. You can't start it at night. But if it stretches out into night, you could make the gemar din b'layla. Dinei nefashos danen b'yayim. You have to start it entire by yayim. V'goyim b'yayim. You have to finish it by day. And you can't finish it at night. You can't do the gemar din at night. Dinei mamnes goyim by b'yayim. Dinei mamnes, if they're able to wrap it up quickly on the same day, you can do so. Bein l'schus, bein l'chayva. Whether they decide he's chayiv or whether he's potter. Dinei nefashos goyim by b'yayim l'schus. You can, if you have a gemar din, you come to a conclusion, you can immediately say he's potter and let the guy go free. Or b'yayim shel akrav l'chayva. But if you want to say he's chayiv, you have to think on it overnight. After they finish their deliberations, they have to wait till the following day to convict him. Lefikach ein danen loy be'erev Shabbos, loy be'erev Yom Tov. Therefore, you can't do dinei nefashos on erev Shabbos and erev Yom Tov, because then you won't be able to convict him the following day if he turns out to be chayiv. So you have to then you'll have to wait 2 days, and then they'll forget what they. I don't know exactly what the problem is, but we don't want you to wait 2 days. So better to wait to a time, go be gomer din on a day where the following day you could say the Gemara din. Dinim Mamonis and Hatumas Va'atyrus and Dinei Torah that affect whether something is Tamei or Tar. Maschilim in Hagadol, you start the arguments or the discussions amongst the Dayanim, you start from whoever's the greatest, because that you have to give cover to the Av Bezdin. Din Nefashos Maschilim in Atzad. But Din Nefashos, the way they used to sit on a dais, right? By every dais, you have to see by the Aguda convention, the Gadol Adar is always right next to the middle. So the person in the middle is the most chashuv, and you get to the ends, you get to the lower levels. So by Din Nefashos, you start by the guys at the end of the dais, because if you start from the Gadol Adar, everyone's going to be hesitant to argue with him. And we want, let's say he says an argument, let's say he's more noita, his questions, even though we said you have to start with schus, but this is not, that was talking about a different thing. But when they're deliberating, we don't want him to say that the chayiv and everyone will bend to his will. Hakol ksher and lod and dini mamonis. Everyone can dan dini mamonis. Ain't hakol ksher and lod and dini nefashos. But not everyone has you have to have kosher yichas to be dan dini nefashos. The only ones who can dan dini nefashos are Kehanim, Levim, Yisraelim, Hamasiim, Lekuna. The only ones are people like Kehanim, Levim, Yisraelim that are kosher to marry a kain. It has to be a kosher yid. Zok the Gemara. It can't be an eved. It can't be I guess a ger. I don't think it's a yeah. I don't know. Maybe a cholol can't be done. Zok the Gemara. The first din we had said is that both dinei mamonis and dinei nefashos are bedrisha b'chakira, that you examine the witnesses. Fact the Gemara, dinei mamonis mi bin drisha b'chakira, and we said in the Mishnah that we learn that from Mishpat Echad, so we have a pasuk for it in the Mishnah. So fact the Gemara, but dinei mamonis mi bin drisha b'chakira. Is that true that dinei mamonis need drisha b'chakira? That you interrogate the Eidim, you ask them what the facts were. If you have a star that the date on it says it was written on the first day of Shemitah, and it was the year of Shemitah. So when it's going to be Rosh Chodesh, when it's going to be Rosh Hashanah, at that point it's going to be the loan is going to be expired. But that the case is that it was in Be'echad B'Nisan, so you still have 6 months till the loan is going to expire. And the star says that it was written, this loan started on the first day of Nisan. Ubo Eidim v'yamru, and Eidim come and say, this star that says Reuven Shimon signed on it, and they said that it was on Echad B'Nisan. Hey, Chatam Eidim al star zeh. How could Reuven Shimon be Eidim on the star? V'aloi b'yayim pleni manu yisim b'makom pleni. You with us in Chicago, and that star says it was written in New York on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and you was in Chicago on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So the Brisa says, "Star kosher ve'edav ksher." The star is a kosher star, in spite of the fact that the Eidim, these second pair of Eidim said that Reuven and Shimon, the Eidim on the star, were not there at the time that it says on the star, and the Eidim are not considered to be Eidim that were Huzam, and that they're going to be puzzled to say this. Why is that? Chayshin Hashem ichru b'kasvu. Maybe the loan was really undertaken on Rosh Chodesh Adar, but they didn't get around to writing the star at that time, and they wrote it a month later on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And at that point, they were taka in Chicago, but they had the loan had taken place in New York, so they wrote that this loan is taking place on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which was that current day, but in New York, because that's where the loan took place. And like we said before, if you write a date on the star we're going to see in a minute also, the Gemara is going to say it, if you write a date on the star that's later than the date that the loan actually took place, it's not a problem. You don't run into a problem of, say, the Lukuchas, because you're writing a date that's after when you wrote it. So tomorrow, but before we get to that, we'll get back to that in a minute. If we say, we ask about when was the shtar written, and where were you, and who were the parties, how could you say that we are chayshish that maybe the whole reason why we asked them what the details were is if they end up being contradicted. We're going to say that their edus is batal, but now it's saying even though they said edus and it was contradicted by other pair of edim, that we just say, oh, they didn't mean it. They really meant something else. But that's the whole point of the Rishon Chakiris, is that they set the facts, and then if they turn out not to be true, we dismiss their edus. It's like tomorrow, if you're asking such a kasha, you should ask from a Mishnah. Why are you asking from a Brisa? You can ask from a Mishnah. Why? If someone makes a loan, let's say we're saying like the case we said before, they made a loan. Reuben made a loan to Shimon on Rosh Chodesh Adar, but they wrote on it instead of Adar, they wrote Rosh Chodesh Kislev. Psulin, it's puzzle, and like we were alluding to before, because you have the problem of Seder L'Kuchas, because the loan actually took place on Rosh Chodesh Adar, but the shtar says Rosh Chodesh Kislev, and if after if the lender who has the shtar goes to the borrower and he says, "Where's my money?" and the borrower says, "I don't have," so he's going to say, let me find out, who did you sell karka to? He could take away the karka from the lekuchas based on the shtar, but the shtar is really only valid. The loan only took place in the other, and he's going to go based on what it says in the shtar. He's going to take from people who bought from the borrower between Kislev and Adar, and he's not really supposed to be able to do that. That's why the shtar is possible. But if you post-date it, it's kosher, because you don't have this problem. But if you say you have to ask the Edom, what are the details? We should have the same problem. If he writes a later date on the shtar, you still have the problem that on the shtar, they're saying that the loan took place on the date that it says on the shtar, and really it took place a month earlier. They wrote Nisan, and it really happened in Adar. So that's not a kasha. The Gemara says that you're saying that we should have asked from that Mishnah instead of the Brisa. It's not a kasha because there was an extra reason why the Brisa was a better kasha. The Adifa Mina Kamina. We wanted to say the case that we said before, where he said on Echad, where they said Echad ben Nisan before Shemitah. Dafilu Echad ben Nisan b'Shemitah, even though they said it was on the Echad Nisan Shemitah. It's not so likely, that someone would lend money in middle of Shemitah, because they know at the end of the Shemitah year it's going to be canceled, right? At the Rosh Hashanah of Shemitah, all loans are canceled. They all become mufka. And even though you can't say that he was ma'acharet and wrote it all the way till the following Rosh Hashanah, because that would ruin the shtar. I feel hachi, even the shviyas soifa b'shametes mechsharinan. Since it's only going to passel the shtar at the end of the year, so there could be he made the loan even maybe just for a couple of months. So you have a couple of months. So there is a little bit. In the end, there is a reason why he made the loan. So even though this is a less likely type of loan, we still allow such a shtar to exist. So that's what we're asking for there. Even in that case, we don't say that the Edom are canceled because they didn't pass the Drishas of Chakiris, because they said one date and it's a different date. That's why we asked from the Brisa. So however, Mikol Makam Kasha, so we're back to our original question. The original question is, why does our Mishnah say Echa Dine Mamnis? That by Dine Mamnis you do Drishim Chakira, but we allow people to write a different Zman, and we still let the shtar be a kosher shtar. So what's going to be the answer to this? Simon Charpash. There's a number of answers. Amar Chanina, Dvar Torah, Echadin Mamas Echadin Fashas Bedusha Bechakira. Shenema Mishpar Echad. Yelacha. Like it said in the Mishnah, really, you do need drishas and chakiras by dinei mamonis. We just proved that by dinei mamonis we accept Eidim even though they did not pass muster with the Eidos that they said about the Zman. Why is it that when someone borrows money that we're saying that we allow the Eidim to stand even though their testimony would not withstand scrutiny because they said a different date than what it actually was. We don't want that a person who lends money will be afraid that they're going to ask a bunch of questions to his Eidim and he's not going to be able to recover his money. So in order to encourage lending, we don't do Drisha Chakiris. Dr. Mara Lamayata Tolo Yishalmu. Mara says, but if that's the case, why do we say if the Bezdin made a mistake that they have to reimburse the parties? Let's say if they made a mistake and they said he doesn't owe the money, they have to pay the lender back. But if they're being hamstrung because they're not allowed to interrogate the Eidim, how could it be their fault that they made a wrong that they made a wrong sock? So the Gemara culture can still doubts with Lovin. The Gemara says because if you say to lo yishalmu, if you say that the judges don't have to pay if they make a mistake, again the lenders are going to be reluctant to lend because they know if Bezdin lets the borrower off the hook mistakenly, there's not going to be any backup. They're not going to get their money back in the end. Rava says a different teretz. Rava Amar Masis Nahach B'dinei Knossos. He says it. So, but Rava says, let's listen. The mission over here is talking about Dinei Knossos, and that's the reason why. Eina Chanami, we say initially the svar of really midaraisa you do need to do chakirs. And we said that by a loan we allow the Eidim, we don't do Drisha Chakirs. He says that a mission over here that says you do Drisha Chakirs is by Dinei Knossos. So there's no Tinel Dallas Pnei Lovin. Knossos is not a halva. But the other case is talking about Hidas Valvos. They're both talking about Hidas Valvos. Kan bedin meruba, kan bedin she'em meruba. That which we say you do Drisha Chakiris is where they have the Dayanim already suspect there's something off. They have reason to believe this guy's last name is Gadi. They're not falling for it. So therefore they do Drisha Chakiris. But when they don't have such an example, then we say, if it's not such an example, we say, love, and they don't do Drisha Chakiris. Kederish Lakish, like Rish Lakish, Rish Lakish Rami, Siv Betzedek Tish Bedamisecha. It says you should judge Betzedek, Siv Tzedek Tzedek Tirdef, and then the pasuk doubles and it says Tzedek twice. You should chase after, you should pursue Tzedek, you should pursue justice. HaKetzad. So what does it mean doubling? Kambedin Meruma, Kambedin She'en Meruma. It's coming to be Mechalik by a din Meraima. You do where there seems to be deceit. You do Drishas of Chakiris. Well, there's no deceit, then you don't do Drishas of Chakiris. Another teretz. Ravashi Amar Masnisan Kedushanin. Ravashi says the truth is we answer the Mishnah like we had originally answered, not that it's because of Shalitinul Dallas, not because of Meraima. But then what do we do with this pasuk of Tzedek? Kroi Echeludin ve'Echel l'Pshara. And the double lashon of Tzedek, one is to tell you in a case where it's better to use a din, then you apply din. The judges decide we're going to apply the din. Ve'Echel l'Pshara. And sometimes the judges will say it's better to do Pshara. What does that mean that you do Pshara, that they decide to do Pshara? Why wouldn't you always do din? Kedetanya. I wish we had more time. This is a very famous Gemara. Says the Tzedek Tirda for Echeladim ve'Echel Pshar. Ketzak. Shteish Svinas Oivers Benar Upagu Zebazet. If two ships are passing in the river and they meet each other in the middle of the river, Im Oivers Shteim Taivos. If they're going to meet in the middle of the river, none one's going to give way. They're both going to hit and they're going to sink. But if they move to the side, then they can both pass. So that's an example. It's better to do the pshara Everyone they'll come to an agreement of who should pass. We'll see. Two camels on a narrow road, base chayron, in the narrow road of base chayron. They meet on the path. If they go meet together, if they both go up, they're going to both fall. But if one moves over to the side and lets the other one pass, they can both go to the summit. So how do you decide what to do? The one who's the burdened camel, one back camel has a burden and one doesn't. The one who's not carrying anything should move over to the side to let the one that's burdened pass through. The one who's near his city, he hasn't traveled as much. The one who's not tired should give way to the one who is tired. But if they're both near or they're both far, or the same thing if they're both carrying a package or both not, then you make a pshara, then you have to come up with a way to decide amongst them. There's no din. They'll make a pshara, and one says, I'll pay you $5 to let me be the one to go through. Okay, we'll stop over here. I just want to point out that this is the famous Gemara that the Chazon Ish said to Ben Gurion. You know that story that the Ben Gurion went to talk about the draft, which is a big topic now. This is the conversation where he originally agreed to allow the Talmidim to avoid the draft, and the Chazon Ish brought this Gemara. He said if you have a loaded camel and a not loaded camel, the not loaded camel has to make way for the one who has a load. And we're carrying the Torah mitzvah, so we're the loaded camel. Very famous Gemara and incident.